So when it comes time to do your draft prep for next year, you already know the deal. The players who finish at the top of their positions pretty much across the board are going to be ranked pretty much at the top of the board in every fantasy platform. But what about those late round picks, those guys who really could help you win your league? Here's some players that we are secretly loving ahead of next year. All right, let's kick off with a couple of sophomores here, guys who didn't have great rookie years, but they could impress in year two.
Definitely, and I definitely think Ricky Pearsall has a chance to impress in year two. This was a guy, I liked him as a prospect. I thought he was one of those kind of under the radar sleeper wide receivers in last year's class. And then the 49ers apparently agreed with me because they drafted him in the first round and he wasn't a sleeper anymore. And then he got shot. Yes, he got shot in the offseason. Thankfully, he was fine. He survived, and we did see him down the stretch. And he actually showed like his potential here, what his role could be in this offense. Over the last 3 games, when he played 70% or more of the snaps in each of those games, he had 18 catches on 22 targets, 247 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And why I liked him so much coming out of college is not only because he's a great route runner, but he's also a great athlete. He's got the speed. He's got the burst. He had a 92nd percentile speed score coming out of college and a 98th percentile burst score. And this is a guy you can line up all over the field, in the slot, on the outside, in that Z flanker type of role. He can play everywhere. And when you look at the 49ers going into next season, it's not hard to envision a role for Ricky Pearsall. Number one, you got Brandon Ayuk, their clear number 1 wide receiver, coming back from an ACL injury. We know how this works. Going to be slow played in. Probably not going to be 100% to start the season. Then you got Deebo Samuel. Is he even going to be a 49er next year? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. Is he even going to be on the roster next year? And then you basically have Juwan Jennings, who, yeah, he was nice this year, but he only really got opportunity because of the injury to Brandon Ayuk. They drafted Ricky Pearsall last year in the first round for a reason. I think we're going to see that reason in 2025. And we know this offense, when everybody or most everybody is healthy, is still one of the best, most fantasy-friendly offenses in the entire NFL. No reason to think they're not going to be healthy going into next year. And no reason to think they're not going to get Ricky Pearsall more involved in year two, especially when he'll have an entire offseason to finally get used to the playbook and the system and Brock Purdy.
All right, now at running back, it's a lot easier for me to tell you players I don't love and don't want to draft, but there's still a couple of kind of mid to late round picks, I think, that are going to go under the radar. Of course, still a lot to play out through this offseason, but I feel pretty confident that the New York Giants are going to do something to address the quarterback position, and that should actually help the running back, Tyrone Tracy. And Tyrone Tracy, well, it was kind of a mixed bag in his rookie year. We knew that he had the talent to be kind of a do everything back, and he did that. He flashed it in the first half of the season. He had 300-yard games just in the first half, and then everything fell apart. Of course, the quarterback situation somehow went from Daniel Jones to worse. And a big part of it, a lot of people don't realize that they lost their best offensive lineman, Andrew Thomas, after week 6, and that definitely hurt. But despite that, Tyrone Tracy finished with a solid 4.4 yards per carry average. He was very effective as a receiver, and that's what you like, the fact that he can do something for you in PPR, give you that floor. I don't know what the Giants are going to do at quarterback. Nobody does yet, but I've got a feeling they're going to do something in terms of the draft. I really wish they had that number 1 pick so I could just say, yeah, it's Cam Ward. Forget it. This is going to be a great offense. It's not that simple anymore, but still, they're going to get either a high-end rookie or a free agent, and that's just going to help the running game. I think Tracy really is going to just be that bell cow back. Really, the only reason Devin Singletary mixed in again at the end of the season is because of the fumbling issues. Brian Daboll, he was kind of going through it all season long, and he decided to teach the rookie a lesson after he fumbled a couple times, whatever. I think that's in the past. Tracy is going to be a guy who shows that explosiveness, again, that pass catching ability. This offense should be a lot better. So I'm going to be in on Tracy as one of those sneaky mid-round running backs that could take off. All right, now let's get a little bit deeper and go to some wide receivers who maybe haven't flashed all of their upside just yet.
Yeah, and I got to say, this pick might be a little recency bias, a little bit of my Commanders fandom here, but maybe, just maybe, Dyami Brown is finally becoming the number 2 wide receiver in Washington here. You look at it in the 2 playoff games so far, he's run the second most routes on the team. He's got the second highest target share on the team, the second highest first read percentage. He has the highest targets per route run on the team, the highest receiving yards per game on the team, and the highest yards per route run on the team. Now, granted, this is a very small sample, and we are talking the NFL playoffs here. We've seen this before. I think the most recent example would be a guy like Gabe Davis. Had a monster playoffs, and everybody overdrafted him that year, and we've seen what's happened since. But look, the Commanders need this number 2. They've been looking for this number 2 guy. It was Noah Brown for parts of the season, and then he got hurt. They drafted Luke McCaffrey. I don't know why they drafted Luke McCaffrey. He was like one of my least favorite wide receiver prospects last year, and I don't think anything has changed my mind about that. Maybe finally Dyami Brown is finally ready to make that leap and be that guy, because he has been that guy in the playoffs so far. Now, I will say the one kind of word of caution here is he's a free agent entering 2025, so there's no guarantee he's even going to be back with the Commanders. But you got to think, with after what he's done in the playoffs and the fact that they don't really have anybody else behind Terry McLaurin, they're going to bring him back. He's not going to command a ton of money. He's not going to command top dollar here. You got to think they're going to bring him back on some kind of cheap contract, maybe a 1-year prove-it type of deal. And assuming they do, and assuming they don't do anything drastic in the draft, like draft one of the wide receivers, not that this is a great wide receiver class, but there's still good wide receivers. Assuming that doesn't happen, we could see Dyami Brown, the number 2 wide receiver for Jaden Daniels, who I think we can now all agree is a stud quarterback. So give me Dyami Brown, assuming the Commanders don't do anything crazy at wide receiver this year. Maybe he's about ready to have a 5th-year breakout, I guess.
We know a team that really ought to just stop trying to draft and sign wide receivers. It's the Carolina Panthers. We saw the Jonathan Mingo thing. Didn't quite pan out. Signing Deontay Johnson, yeah, that didn't turn out too well either. Look, Xavier Legette had a decent rookie year. He led the team in targets. But you know who I think the star of the show will be in 2025, or should be? It's Jalen Coker, the guy who wasn't even drafted. Look, Xavier Legette had 84 targets, which seems like a lot, but he only wound up with 497 yards. Jalen Coker, who missed some time with injury, on only 46 targets, had almost the same amount of yardage, 478. That's because he is a big play threat. That's because he can get yak. He can do those things and stretch the field. And the only issue here, I think right now, is not whether Coker can produce, it's whether Bryce Young can continue to produce. And we started to see it toward the end of last season. I mean, I know it was a long road. It feels like a long road. It's only been 2 years, right? Bryce Young only has 2 years in the league. It feels like he was a bust. But sometimes quarterbacks take more than a couple of weeks to develop, right? Not everybody can be Jaden Daniels. But we saw over the final 3 weeks, Bryce Young really start to click. 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He not only cut out the turnovers, he was actually getting his team to compete and almost win despite having almost no defense. And toward the end there, hardly any of a running game with all those running backs getting hurt. And so Jalen Coker is a guy who was able to help Bryce Young stretch the field when they did try to go deep. And I talked about that yak earlier. Believe it or not, he finished top 10 in yak expected per reception, tied with CeeDee Lamb. That's right. That's a guy who is pretty good. And these are some receivers that can make plays with the ball in their hands, not just depending on the quarterback to get them the ball. I just think Bryce Young and Coker and this offense will continue to develop under Dave Canales. This is what he was brought in to do, and it's working, and we should see that take another step forward this year. So yeah, Coker might not be a guy who becomes an alpha receiver, may not lead the team even in targets, but it'll probably lead them in big plays, possibly touchdowns, and he's going to be basically dirt cheap or free on draft day, I think. Now, it's hard for quarterbacks to really go under the radar, especially when they're already starting quarterbacks, but we each have a guy at the position that we like.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel like Brock Purdy might be the most disrespected QB in all of fantasy football. All he's done the last 2 years is finish as a QB6 and the QB9 in terms of points per game, and still it's like nobody ever wants to draft this guy, right? In your typical 12-team, 1 QB leagues, he just never even gets drafted. But I think he's probably going to be that QB where if I punt the position, which I may do this year, he's going to be the guy I'm going to go out and try to get. And like I said, when I talked about Ricky Pearsall, we know this offense, when fully healthy, is one of the best offenses in real life and in fantasy. Go back just 2 years ago when this offense was fully healthy. He was a QB6 in points per game that year, averaged over 19 points per game. But even last year, when it feels like he wasn't that good for fantasy, he still gave you 8 games of a top 10 QB finish, gave you 9 games of over 19 fantasy points, and he only went under 15 fantasy points in 3 games all season long. So he gave you a very safe floor with a good ceiling. Plus, he has sneaky rushing upside. I don't think people realize it. He's not a guy like, of course, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, but he'll scramble when he needs to. He had 323 rushing yards last year, 5 rushing touchdowns. So he gives you a bit of that rushing upside as well. And this offense, again, when fully healthy, is one of the best. And we got to go into next season assuming they're going to be fully healthy. I think the most important piece is probably left tackle Trent Williams. GM Jonathan Lynch already saying, yep, he should be good to go next year. We got to think CMC is going to be good to go next year. I think that's going to be huge for his value. And then I already talked about that pass catching. I mean, he's got Kittle. He's going to have Ayuk at least for part of the season. Pearsall, Jennings, maybe Debo. I mean, there are still a ton of weapons in this offense. And he still has Kyle Shanahan. Say whatever you want about Kyle Shanahan. He is an offensive guru. He can get this ship righted on offense. And Brock Purdy, once again, next year will probably finish as a top 10, top 6 QB in fantasy that nobody wants to draft, but I'll happily take him in the last rounds of my drafts when I punt QB.
Well, I think I'm just going to have to come out and say maybe Sean Payton is an offensive guru after all as well. Again, I'll fully admit, before last season, I thought the Broncos were going to be one of the worst offenses in the league. Didn't think Bo Nix would do anything for fantasy, and clearly I was wrong. I came around on him midway through the season after I saw he was able to put up numbers despite a somewhat suspect supporting cast. I mean, Cortland Sutton, clearly an alpha receiver. And after that, we had a bunch of question marks. And we still have a bunch of question marks at running back and tight end. I mean, that offense is not perfect, but Bo Nix made it work, finished with pretty good rookie numbers for a quarterback, 29 touchdowns, 3,775 yards, and his 66% completion rate. Not bad for his first year, despite the fact he didn't have, I guess what we would call a truly elite receiver and definitely not great depth at any position. And so I'll give credit where credit is due. I don't know if Bo Nix will get enough credit though, because going into next year, probably not a lot will change with this offense. Now, of course, you can say, well, yeah, he's going to make some strides going in the second year. He's going to get better because that's what rookies do, right? They improve and familiar with the offense, blah, blah, blah. They're going to do something else, though. They've got to do something else. And Sean Payton has already started to hint he really wants not only some stability at running back, which we all do. We would love that to know who's actually going to be the starting running back for Denver. He wants somebody like an Alvin Kamara, what he calls that joker position, which could be a running back who's a great pass catcher, or it could be a tight end that you can move around. And so I'm not going to go so far as to say I think they're going to take Ashton Giante or some elite running back necessarily, but I think that they might do something like take a guy at tight end like Tyler Warren, who's been said that he could do that. Very versatile, very productive. Of course, Penn State tight ends, they do that. I wouldn't be surprised if they do something to get a guy that they can move around and, try to make like the next Brock Bowers. Again, I'm not saying Warren is that or that they'll do that. I don't know what they're going to do it, but they're going to do something to help the running back position, the tight end position, hopefully both. Bo Nix is just going to get better. And yet I don't feel like he's going to see his stock rise for fantasy all that much. And so, look, if you want to take a Josh Allen, a Lamar Jackson early in draft, I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting those guys, obviously. I would still rather have an elite receiver running back rounds 2 or 3 where you have to pay up to get those quarterbacks, and then take a guy who could break out and be a stud QB in the mid to late rounds, kind of like Baker Mayfield was last year. You're right, Purdy could be it, and so could Nix. I will give you a couple of names of some receivers that could step up and break out next season, but you want more? Okay, how about these 5 receivers who could have breakout seasons?